These men of faith were also the world's first anatomists, and the reason they dissected the dead wasn't for medicine, but for immortality. This wasn't a quest for knowledge as we know it. It was a desperate, 3,000-year-long battle against the one enemy that no pharaoh, no army, and no god could truly defeat, death itself. And to conquer it, they first had to understand the very machine that death breaks, the human body. When you picture an ancient Egyptian priest, what comes to mind? Probably a man of faith, right? Shrouded in incense, chanting prayers in some vast stone temple. And you wouldn't be wrong. They were absolutely guardians of the sacred. But their most profound secrets, the knowledge that set them apart, weren't found in prayers whispered to the heavens. They were discovered with the cold, hard precision of a surgeon's knife, the finality of death. So, why would a priest pick up a blade? To answer that, you have to understand what death meant to the Egyptians. It wasn't some peaceful sleep or a gentle trip to a cloudy paradise. No, it was a terrifying ordeal. A dangerous journey through a treacherous underworld known as the Do-It, filled with monsters, lakes of fire, and demons. The goal was to make it to the Field of Reeds, a perfect, eternal version of Egypt. But getting there was anything but guaranteed. Central to this whole journey was their concept of the soul. It was far more complex than a single ghost. They believed a person was made of multiple spiritual parts. Two of the most important were the Ka and the Ba. The Kia was the life force, a kind of spiritual twin that needed food and drink even after death. The Ba was closer to our idea of a personality, shown as a human-headed bird that could fly between the tomb and the underworld. And here's the problem that drove their entire civilization. For the afterlife to work, for the Ka and Ba to have a home to return to, the body had to stay intact and recognizable. If the body turned to dust, the soul became homeless, doomed to wander forever. The body wasn't just a vessel. It was essential hardware for the soul's software. So death presented an urgent engineering crisis. The warm, damp Nile climate was incredibly efficient at decomposition. Left to nature, a body would be gone in weeks. Early on, Egyptians noticed that bodies buried in the hot desert sand were naturally preserved. This likely sparked the idea, what if they could control that process? What if they could defeat decay itself? This wasn't about being sentimental. It was about survival after death. Every Egyptian, from the pharaoh down to the farmer, feared the oblivion of bodily destruction more than death itself. Their entire culture, the pyramids, the tombs, the spells, was a response to this one terrifying threat. They needed a technology, a sacred science to preserve the physical body. And the only people who could develop it were the priests. The solution, the sacred science faced with this crisis. The priests of Egypt developed one of the most elaborate ritual technologies in history, mummification. This was more than just pickling a body. It was a sacred 70-day ceremony to turn a fragile corpse into an eternal vessel. The priests in charge of this holy work, the Sem-priests, were the engineers of the afterlife. When a wealthy Egyptian died, their body was taken to a workshop called the Wabit, or place of purification. There, the chief embalmer, a high-ranking priest, would often wear the mask of a jackal, becoming the god Anubis, the guardian of the dead. This was a job for clergy, not doctors. While Egyptian physicians had their own impressive skills for treating the living, the act of opening a body was generally taboo. The embalming priests, however, operated under a divine mandate. They were allowed to do what no one else could, open the human body. Even so, the act was filled with spiritual danger. To cut a human body was to harm it. To get around this, they used a fascinating ritual. The priest who made the first cut, the cutter, wasn't the head priest. He was a lower-level assistant who did this one necessary, but unclean act. After making the incision with a flint knife, he'd be ritually cursed, sometimes even having stones thrown at him as the other priests chased him away. This symbolic punishment was designed to place the blame for the act onto a single scapegoat, purifying the rest of the sacred process. This one ritual shows the incredible tension at the heart of their work. They had to deconstruct the body in order to save it. They quickly realized that the internal organs, full of moisture, were the first to rot and spread decay. The solution was as logical as it was radical. The organs had to come out. This decision, born from religious need, forced the priests to become explorers of the human interior. Their sacred rituals became, in essence, the world's first surgical guides, all in the service of theology. This intersection of faith and anatomy is just fascinating, isn't it? If you're finding this journey into the past as compelling as I am, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button and the bell icon. We have so many more secrets from the ancient world to uncover together, and you won't want to miss what's coming. The anatomical exploration. The how. The embalming tent was a place of both intense ritual and surprisingly practical work. Here, the priests put centuries of accumulated knowledge to use. Their first target, the brain, and their attitude towards it is, frankly, shocking to us today. We see the brain as the source of our identity. The Egyptians believed its main job was to make mucus. They thought it was just skull stuffing. So it was treated with zero reverence. A priest would take a long bronze hook, shove it up the nostril, and punch through the thin ethmoid bone into the skull. Then they'd whisk the hook around, liquefying the brain. The body would be tilted, and the brain would simply drain out through the nose. It wasn't preserved. It was thrown away. Next up, the organs in the chest and abdomen. Reaching through the single incision on the left side, the priests worked by touch, navigating the body's internal architecture. They systematically removed the lungs, liver, stomach, and intestines. But these organs weren't tossed out like the brain. They were seen as essential for the afterlife, so they were preserved separately. Each organ was washed in palm wine, dried in a natural salt called natron, and then wrapped in linen. Then, each was placed in its own dedicated container, a canopic jar. These were sacred vessels, each protected by one of the 4 sons of the god Horus. The liver was guarded by human-headed Insidi, the lungs by Hapi, the baboon, the stomach by Duamutef, the jackal, and the intestines by Kebesenuf, the falcon. These jars were placed in the tomb with the mummy, ensuring the deceased had everything they needed. Through this process, the priests learned exactly where these 4 organs were and how to tell them apart, a foundational lesson in anatomy. But through all of this, one organ was deliberately and carefully left untouched. One organ was so vital that removing it was unthinkable: the heart. For the Egyptians, the heart, or Ib, was the center of everything intelligence, emotion, memory, and personality. It was the organ that thought and felt. They believed it kept a perfect record of every single thing a person did in their life. And that record was critical for one final, terrifying test: the weighing of the heart ceremony. In the underworld's Hall of Two Truths, the dead would stand before the god Osiris. Anubis would place the person's heart on one side of a golden scale. On the other, he'd place the single white feather of Mat, the goddess of truth and justice. If you lived a good life, your heart would be light and balanced perfectly with the feather. You'd be welcomed into eternal paradise. But if your heart was heavy with sin, it would tip the scales. Waiting right there was a monstrous creature named Amit, the devourer of the dead, part crocodile, part lion, part hippo. She would lunge forward and eat the heavy heart, and your soul would be annihilated, ceasing to exist for all time. The priests, knowing this risk, came up with a form of magical insurance. A special amulet, the heart scarab, was wrapped over the mummy's heart. On it was a spell from the Book of the Dead, an appeal directly to the heart. "O my heart, do not stand up as a witness against me." They were basically trying to magically muzzle the main witness for the prosecution. This one practice shows their worldview perfectly. A deep anatomical knowledge of the heart's location, combined with a theological belief in its function, leading to a magical solution to ensure a good outcome. It was the ultimate fusion of surgery, faith, and magic. The legacy, from ritual to medical knowledge, for nearly 3,000 years. Embalming priests performed these sacred dissections. Generation after generation, they saw the reality of the human interior. This wasn't science for science's sake. It was religious work. And yet, they couldn't help but learn. This massive, ancient ritual created an accidental byproduct, a body of anatomical knowledge that was unparalleled in the ancient world. The most stunning proof of this is a document called the Edwin Smith Papyrus, dating to around 1600 BCE. It's a copy of an even older text and is one of the world's oldest surviving surgical treatises. Reading it today is breathtaking because it's almost entirely free of magic. Instead, it's a rational, methodical guide to medicine. The papyrus details 48 cases of traumatic injury, starting at the head and working down the body. Each case has a title, an examination, a diagnosis, and a treatment. Remarkably, each one ends with a prognosis. An ailment which I will treat, an ailment with which I will contend, or the brutally honest, an ailment not to be treated, an admission of their limits that is a hallmark of real science. The anatomical knowledge inside is astonishing. The papyrus has the first known descriptions of the brain, cranial sutures, and the membranes covering the brain. The author even notes that an injury to one side of the brain can cause paralysis. On the opposite side of the body, an observation that wouldn't be rediscovered in Europe for thousands of years. It also shows that they understood the heart was the center of a vessel system that reached the whole body, and that the pulse was the heart speaking. This raises a fascinating question. Did the knowledge from the embalming tents flow to the physicians treating the living? While the exact relationship between embalmers and physicians is still debated by historians, it's hard to imagine that 3 millennia of dissection had no impact on medical practice. This document proves that alongside magical healing texts, there was a deeply practical and clinical approach to medicine based on observation. Still, we shouldn't overstate their understanding. While they could identify organs, their ideas about their functions were often symbolic. They knew the liver existed, but not its metabolic role. Their knowledge was structural, not physiological. They had a map of the body, but they didn't fully understand how the country worked. This is the ultimate legacy of the Egyptian priests. In their quest to defeat death, they were forced to confront the body, and in doing so, they accidentally became the world's first anatomists. So, back to our original question. Why did ancient priests study human organs? The answer wasn't a thirst for scientific knowledge. It was a passionate, desperate hope for eternal life. The embalmer's blade wasn't a tool of inquiry. It was an instrument of faith. The anatomical knowledge they gained was an accidental science born from a religious duty. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the biggest leaps in understanding our physical world come when we're wrestling with the deepest questions of the human spirit. The priests of ancient Egypt looked inside the human body for a path to the heavens. What they found was the first chapter in the long, complex story of humanity's attempt to understand itself. What do you think is the most surprising discovery from this ancient intersection of faith and science? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to keep exploring the forgotten knowledge of our ancestors, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.